a UX designer. And UX designer basically just means making stuff for the web or where a human being interacts with a computer. And for me personally, whenever I go to UX talks, I am always really annoyed that someone like me will come up here and tell people like you what supposedly makes for good web design. So that's what I'm not going to do. In fact, let's see if this works. I think that a lot of these UX laws, which they consider laws, are actually debatable. So in this talk, I'm going to be doing something a little bit unholy in my field, and that is basically to challenge the 7 UX mantras that in my field is, almost like a religion, basically. And so I have 20 minutes, 7 is a lot, so let's just get started with the first one. And this is a very common thing that good UX is supposed to be familiar, or in other, every interface should feel like you immediately know how to use it, and you should be able to make sense of it because it looks like everything else on the web. So let's challenge that. So in 1951, there was an industrial designer called Raymond Loewy, and he claimed that people are torn between 2 extremes. On the one hand, like a fear of trying new things, and on the other hand, a curiosity about new things. So what does that mean? So, for example, if you are selling something, if you're introducing a brand new product to market, like let's say something like vegan eggs that are made from soybeans. In that case, you probably want to design packaging that looks as close to regular chicken eggs as possible. But if you're selling regular chicken eggs next to a bunch of other regular chicken eggs, you want to design a package that obviously stands out and looks different. And so that principle, even though it's from the 50s and in industrial design and in packaging design, it also applies to interface design. So when we were working on the new M+ museum in Hong Kong, we wanted to make sure that the digital experience of this new museum would be remembered, obviously, but would also stand apart from all the other museum websites in the world. And so we looked at the interfaces of the most visited museum in the world, and we quickly realized that they all pretty much look the same, right? I mean, even though these are in totally different parts of the world and they have totally different collections, they all look the same. They all have these large marquees and mostly black and white interior pages. And so, that's kind of lame, right? But our analysis, I think, revealed something even sadder, and that is that none of them had a sense of place. You could swap out Seoul for Amsterdam, for Torino, for Lima, and it all looked exactly the same. I think we have the Swiss to thank for that, by the way, if there's any Swiss people in here. And we, of course, wanted to make sure that not only would it stand out, against all the other regular chicken eggs, which we just saw, but it would also feel like it belonged to Hong Kong and nowhere else. And, Hong Kong is messy, it's chaotic, it's colorful, it's not black and white at all. So Swiss design in Hong Kong wouldn't really make any sense, right? Also, what I love about Hong Kong personally is that Hong Kong is truly bilingual. So when you walk around Hong Kong, it's really unique in that all the street signs are always in traditional Chinese as well as in English. And we wanted to make a truly bilingual interface. But making an interface truly bilingual, and not just changing the language in the utility navigation, like most websites do, it's a design challenge, but also a pretty hardcore technical challenge. So we created a grid that would support a bilingual system, and each layout would receive its own unique color combo, and it would work both if English was a priority or if traditional Chinese was a priority. And so thanks to all of these considerations, M+ was not only able to stand out from all the other museum websites in the world, but it still also conveyed a strong sense of place. But once you move beyond the question of familiarity, another really big cliche in my field comes up, the idea that good UX should always minimize complexity. So let's talk about complexity, but let's talk about complexity through the lens of what computer scientist Larry Tesler said. So Larry Tesler, when he was at Xerox PARC in the mid-1980s, he said that complexity in interface design doesn't just disappear, it relocates. So if you picture complexity as a balloon, squeezing it on one end reduces the complexity for the user, but it inflates the complexity for the back end, and vice versa. Because all interfaces are inherently complex. You as a user, however, might not see that complexity at all times because it's hidden by the system. And the work we did for my friend and artist Chantal Martin is a good example of this. So the interface that we designed for Chantal might appear simple, but it's actually very, very complex. Wow. So by photographing Chantal on top of her art and using that image as kind of a maze-like navigation, we shifted the simplicity of her art into a deliberately complicated user experience. And if users would discover the word play, they could even interact with her art, which we had turned into code, shifting even more complexity back into the user's hands. So I always think of complexity not only as inevitable, but like an intentional oscillation between hiding and exposing complexity to the user. In other words, our aim, or my aim, when designing interfaces isn't just to simplify or complicate, but to strategically relocate that complexity in a manner that makes the user experience better. Yes, and if we are talking about complexity, there's a related mantra that good UX doesn't need to be learned. So this idea that you use an interface, you should immediately know how to use it. I can't really see, but a little bit. Who here plays video games? Does anyone play video games? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, almost everyone. Awesome, me too. So you guys know that the best video games actually seamlessly teach you their mechanics without it ever even feeling like a lesson. And so, bear with me. I promise this will connect eventually. So that's me there. And I grew up in a lesbian commune in Amsterdam, like you do, totally normal. And a couple of years ago, we decided to make an interactive documentary about my childhood home, this lesbian commune. The problem, however, with interactive documentaries is that they're kind of an oxymoron, because interactions ask you to lean in and act, and documentaries ask you to lean back and watch, which creates kind of like a weird vibe. So in order to make that feel more natural, we actually looked at early, like 1980s video games, like Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego or The Legend of Zelda. And what we learned is that immediate usability isn't actually always essential. Instead, an interface can gradually teach us how to interact with it, kind of in a scaffolded way, like in gaming. So the emphasis for me in interface design isn't on immediate clarity at all. It's about teaching or creating an interaction that teaches as it goes. All right, so now I'm at the holy grail of usability. Usability. So good UX, obviously, supposedly, is usable first. And yes, we have to keep it top of mind. Please don't hate tweet me. That sometimes happens when I counter this in a room full of designers. However, there are times where beauty actually beats usability. So in 1995, there were a group of Japanese scientists, and they tried to understand the correlation between usability and aesthetics in computer interaction. And they asked 252 participants to judge 26 different ATM interfaces based on their ease of use and how aesthetically pleasing those interfaces were perceived to be. And it turns out that people don't judge usability based on how useful the interface actually is. We judge usability based on aesthetics. In other words, we are biased to believe that beautiful products work better, even if they don't. And when they don't, we are still far more forgiving of any potential usability issue we might encounter in the product later on. So this brings me to the totally unusable but beautiful Neuro Watch, which was designed by my partner Anton in our studio. So this watch is the opposite of a smartwatch. It does absolutely nothing except tell the time, and it does that poorly. So why is this watch so unusable? It has two dials, one with hours at the top and the other with minutes at the bottom, but they both have their own individual crown, so you can't set the time, all at once. And because minutes are only shown in intervals of 5, it's basically at some moments in the day, it's kind of hard to tell what time it is, which is kind of the point of a watch. So yes, the Neuro Watch is not very easy to use, but neither is a Leica camera or Philip Stark's lemon squeezer, or which is a Diablo in Spanish means devil, so the Lamborghini devil is also very difficult to drive. But we don't mind putting in the effort because we value their beauty more. And this doesn't mean that we can only focus on making things beautiful and just calling it a day. Our willingness to forgive does have its limits. If something doesn't work at all, obviously no amount of beauty will save it. Moving beyond usability, in my field, there's this thing people always say, like, oh, good UX is universal, like it should be the same for everyone. But good UX is actually situational because it depends on context and environment and ability. Actually, I want to ask another question. Who here has ever had to help their parents with their smartphones, or maybe grandparents? I don't know how young people are in this room. Okay, so good thing they gave birth to their own IT support, I guess. So for me, however, IT support. So for me, however, this went beyond the kind of usual, what is Bluetooth questions. When my mom lost most of her eyesight 2 years ago. And when my mom went blind, I realized, just how incredibly inaccessible almost all digital experiences are. And around the same time my mom went blind, totally coincidentally, we started working with DQ, and DQ are one of the leading authorities in digital accessibility. And we learned a lot from this project. So once we wrapped up the project with DQ, I wanted to do a personal project with our studio that would help demystify accessibility for digital designers. But before we go any further, I do have a confession to make, because when I started out as a digital designer 20-some years ago, my interfaces were full of text that was hard to read, navigation I even forgot how to use, plus it was all built in Flash, and I hope some of you are young enough to not remember. I mean, Flash was amazing, but also completely inaccessible, like there was nothing accessible about it. Basically, I didn't care about accessibility at all. I didn't care at all. And in fact, whenever I would hear about that, I was like, ugh, these interfaces look like, they're stuck in Windows 95 forever. So we created this guide, both as a website and a book, specifically for digital designers, because over the years, I've realized that the biggest challenge isn't the lack of accessible tools or solutions, it's the lack of understanding. And even among my master's students, accessibility basics are almost always missing. But it's also not a small problem. According to the World Health Organization, 1.3 billion people worldwide live with some form of disability, yet only 4% of all digital experiences are fully accessible, 4%. So if we imagine the web as a sidewalk, 96% of it would be inaccessible, or to people with disabilities. And also, all of us in this room will need accessible design eventually. By 2050, 1 in 5 people will be over the age of 65, and that's not just like aging Europe and the United States, here in Vietnam as well. So that future is coming fast. And we can either design for it or be designed out of it. And so when I think about the future of design, I don't think about some Minority Report cool little interface, or I don't know, an AI agent that will do my work for me. I actually picture my mom, and I think about how much easier her life would be now, if I would have cared about accessibility a lot earlier in my career. So this brings me to mantra number 6. We're almost there. I told you there were 7, so don't get restless. We're close. Good UX can be measured. Analytics and all that fun stuff. But can it really be measured? Is there a way to quantify it, to prove it? Is there a way to ensure it? And the short answer is kind of, but not really. I have seen user testing done in a room with like 7 people, and somehow 5 of them were the designer's cousins or whatever. I've also seen designers test usability of their own products in a way that obviously the results will skew positive because you don't want to tell your client like, oops, it doesn't work. Also, it's kind of weird that we're still user testing kind of basic things. The internet's been around for almost 30 years now, so to me it's like, imagine still regularly using testing the hammer or the knife or the wheel. Like at some point, we have to kind of be like, okay, we know how a menu works, right? And not only that, but I think as designers, we also have to be more honest about the uncertainty involved in good design, because pretending like design is some kind of quantifiable hard science, that then implies that it could be reproduced by whoever has access to the exact same data. Not to get into AI, but can, it's just not now, I don't have the time. So this brings me to my final point, and it goes beyond data. And it's about why we even do what we do. And I always found it quite sad that we as designers spend the majority of our talents helping other people sell shit. Helping other people sell shit was really never my dream in life. Maybe it's yours. Not judging, kudos to you, but it was definitely not mine. And so that's why when we launched our studio, we decided to reserve some time and money each year to work on projects that personally resonated with us. And that's what gave us the ability to do the interactive documentary about my childhood home, or Anton's Watch, or even the accessibility project I just talked about. So I'm going to end today by telling you the story of one more. I live in Barcelona now, and only recently I learned something quite disturbing, and that is that only 8% of Barcelona streets are named after women. And on top of that, most of the streets that are named after women are in the outskirts of the city and much shorter than streets named after men. So I guess size does matter, after all. And the goal of the project was to get people to not just learn about this, these are the streets named after men, and be outraged, these are the streets named after women, so it's just like, but to vote on how they think Barcelona's street names should be distributed. And while I was working on this project, it got me thinking how that when we work on our personal interests, we get to shed light on topics that might otherwise remain invisible. And I think that's important, not just for the sake of getting that story out, but also for ourselves, so that we can wake up a couple of weeks a year and work on something that actually matters. And so taking that feeling one step further, I recently teamed up with my Danish friends from Space 10 in a new initiative called 21st Europe. And it's all about rethinking how policy and design can work together to better serve society, as a whole. And our plan is to launch 4 speculative blueprints, which are like design projects, every year in collaboration with different European designers, architects, and policymakers, to basically spark conversation. And the first one we launched was Starline, a vision for a continent-wide high-speed rail, which Europe still doesn't have. The second was Continent of Play, a proposal to build playgrounds as essential civic infrastructure, which my partners bullied me into because they have a bunch of kids. And most recently we launched Made in Europe, a label to promote European products and technologies that are made with care, fairness, and respect for the planet, because we're in a climate crisis after all. And the next topic is our lightest yet, nuclear energy. Surely people care about what designers have to say about that. Anyhow, it's all very ambitious and nobody's paying us to do this. yet. But we are working with institutions like the European Commission, which is exactly as fun and efficient as it sounds. So in conclusion, I'd like to argue that good UX can be unfamiliar, relocates complexity, takes effort to learn, is beautiful first, is situational, can be measured, and addresses my needs. Thank you for listening to my little rant.
Wow.
Can you do more? Get this. But also, very importantly, just remember, mantras are great, but they're for meditation, not design.
And also meditation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Irene, for so very meaningful to talk about design and very